Boundaries. Apparently, there are some misconceptions about boundaries, about what they are, how they differ from ultimatums, and who's supposed to be upholding them. So today, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty when it comes to boundaries. Welcome back, guys, to another video. I'm Blackwood, your Silicon Valley Sage Sister, here to bring consciousness to the forefront of your daily life to make life a little kinder and simpler. So, boundaries. Let's just get down to it. Boundaries are your responsibility to uphold. Other people can respect your boundaries. Other people cannot uphold your boundaries. It is up to you to uphold your boundaries. Period. End of story. Because when it comes down to it, someone else can respect your boundaries or not. Someone can, once you've set a boundary, either abide by it or not. But there are many people in this world who, even if they do know your boundaries, won't respect them. So that's when it becomes, that's why it is, not when it even becomes, because it's always, that is why it's your responsibility to uphold them. So let's break this down. First of all, if you have a boundary, you have to tell somebody about it to expect them to know that you have it, because people are just different enough that they may come from a completely different world where completely different things are acceptable or not acceptable. So first of all, it is absolutely your responsibility to tell somebody what your boundaries are. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some boundaries as human beings that we kind of expect to be understood, but nevertheless, what this comes down to is that if you find yourself in a position where the other person is not respecting your boundaries and they don't even know because you haven't told them what your boundaries are, to expect them to just know, that's unreasonable in the grand scheme of things. So even if it seems obvious to you, if you haven't told somebody, just be nice about it and tell them, hey, you've done this thing. That's not something I'm okay with. Please don't do it again. From there, because that is number one, as far as how we uphold our boundaries, we tell people what they are. From there, if someone still isn't respecting your boundaries, we have to consider, do we tell them again? Because if you really like somebody and it's just one little thing and it's not a bunch of boundaries, it might be reasonable to have another conversation with them, maybe get a little more serious. But if someone really isn't respecting your boundaries after you've already told them what they are, the other way in which we discern the difference between respecting and upholding is that it is your responsibility to stop spending time with this person. Someone else can only respect your boundaries. They can either abide by them or not. They can either go along with them, or they're not. But at the end of the day, if someone isn't respecting your boundaries, then it is your responsibility to stop being around them. Not everybody is going to be able to uphold your boundaries. That's not to say that they shouldn't. We're not going to get into that. Just as I'm not going to get into what people should or shouldn't know. We're just going to break it down this simply. So, someone still can't respect your boundaries. That's your opportunity to decide, what am I going to do? It might be that you turn around and realize, you know what? What I thought was a boundary really was just me being unreasonable. And that's not to say that everything that we think are boundaries are unreasonable. We all have a lot of boundaries that are very reasonable. But you've got to ask yourself, okay, am I being unreasonable here, or are they? Am I being unreasonable here, or are they just not respecting my boundaries? You just have to ask it. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to consider it for a moment. And especially if these are well-considered boundaries, most of the time the answer is going to be no. I am not being unreasonable. This person isn't respecting my boundaries. I need to stop spending time with them. I've given them I've had that hard conversation with them. And this is where I want to get into the difference between ultimatums and boundaries. Because a boundary comes from a place of empowerment, and ultimatum comes from a place of disempowerment. So it wouldn't be to say that's why I didn't say you've given them your ultimatum, because when we're upholding our boundaries, having that hard conversation of, look, this is my boundary. If you can't uphold it, I can't be around you. That's not an ultimatum. That is upholding your boundaries from a place of empowerment. An ultimatum, it's a semantical difference, because often, honestly, the words that we say can be the same, but it's where you're coming from inside that makes the difference between upholding your boundaries and setting an ultimatum. Because upholding your boundaries can often look like an ultimatum if someone is disrespecting your boundaries. So that's why I want to be clear on that, and why I mentioned it in the very beginning, because the difference is how you feel inside, honestly. An ultimatum is coming from a place of, I feel so helpless in this situation that I have to, in flight or fight mode, set this here as a way to protect myself. As where when we're upholding our boundaries, what we're doing is from a place of empowerment, saying, this is my boundary. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. And if you don't, that's cool. We'll just not hang out. Or we'll just find very minimal ways to communicate, like if it's with a coworker. We'll find different ways to interact so that this isn't an issue anymore. That is the difference. The difference is a mindset. The difference is literally boundary upheld equals I am empowered. I know this is what I need. This is what happens. No muss, no fuss. This is what we're doing. Ultimatum comes from a place of stress and frustration and I can't handle this anymore. And it doesn't have to be that way, because when you know it's your boundary and it's right, it is easy to get behind, which is why part of my course that I have is about figuring out what your priorities are so that you can set your boundaries, so that there is no question. I know what my values are. I know what my priorities are. So therefore I know what my boundaries need to be, so I can uphold them from a place of empowerment. So you've got to ask yourself, like I said, am I being unreasonable or not? Often the answer is going to be not. I'm not being unreasonable. Cool. So, do I have to be around this person? Do I not have to be around this person? That's your choice, and that is your decision, because that person is not forcing you to be around them 90% of the time. Like I said, if it's a coworker and you have to be around them, in the grand scheme of things, if it's really bad, you might have to transfer divisions. You might have to have a conversation with your boss. You might have to quit your job if it's really that bad. And I know that sucks, and I know that that's not often, often that doesn't seem like a reasonable solution for people, a viable solution for people. But again, this is why it is your responsibility to uphold your boundaries. No one else can do it for you. And often people won't do it for you. They can either respect them or not. But it is your complete responsibility to make sure that they are being upheld, because you can choose, whether it's a tough decision or not, you can choose to decide whether or not to be in that situation or not. So now I want to give you guys some examples of what I would call smaller versus bigger boundaries, and where it is okay to maybe compromise a little bit, and examples of when it might not be. And I'm going to just give these all as personal examples so that I'm not generalizing. I'm just talking about examples for me, so that maybe that'll be relatable to you. So the whole reason why I even thought to do this video and put my post on Instagram that I did the other day was because I have this boundary that I do compromise on from time to time, about the fact that I don't let other people drive me around, really. And there is a few exceptions, but it's rare. And that's because I don't like getting stuck anywhere where I'm reliant on somebody else to have to wait for them if I want to go home, if I'm ready to leave. And so I was reminded of this just the other day. And, you know, that is a good example of one of my smaller boundaries that I do compromise on from time to time. For instance, if my significant other drives me around, we have a pretty good, or if I drive him around, we have a pretty good understanding of where each other's thresholds are for being outside. If you know anything about human design, we both have Hermit in our chart. So we both have, mine is less than his. I'm a 6'2" and he's a 2'5". So, you know, my Hermit comes after my other one, is where his Hermit comes first. So we both have an understanding of where each other's thresholds are when it comes to things as far as being out and about, because we don't like being out and about for long, and we both prefer to be home most of the time. So that would be an example of a time where I would let somebody else drive me, because us both taking separate cars to go do something together would be silly, especially because we live together. As where an example why I thought of this was because he got driven by somebody else the other day and ended up being out longer than he wanted to, and I went, yep, that's why I don't do that with people. That's exactly why either I drive so I can set the standard of how long we're out and where we're going, or I go in separate cars, because I do not like getting stuck out with people and not being able to come home when I want to, and he doesn't either. So that's an example of a small boundary that can be compromised on sometimes. An example of a boundary that I don't compromise on is I am capable of being friends with people I used to go out with. There aren't a lot of them, but my first boyfriend ever, he and I still go to lunch from time to time. It's rare these days because we live far away from each other, but if he were to come into town and be like, hey, let's go get lunch, I would go do that. One of my other boyfriends, I'm still very, very good friends with. So that's one of those things that I don't compromise on whatsoever, because we are just friends. There's nothing going on. The person I am with, period. So it is just a friendship at that point for both of us. With the people that I love, that I actually genuinely love, that's the scales of love will be a video for another time. But for the people that I genuinely love, I will always be there for them. And my significant other understands this because there was a period of time where we were together before, and then we weren't together for a little period of time, and now we're back together. So he understands that we were friends during that period of time that we weren't together. But if he couldn't understand this and felt like it wasn't okay for him to have me go out to lunch with my exes who I am genuinely just friends with, that would be it. That is something I don't compromise on, because the people that I genuinely love, I will always be there for. So if he couldn't understand that, even though it's just being there as friends, if he couldn't understand that, that's it. We wouldn't be together, because that's a boundary I don't compromise on. I am there for those I love, even if they are exes that I am just friends with. Let's see, what's something else? Trying to come up with just personal experiences that I can tell you guys about. The truth is another example of a boundary that I uphold. I tell the truth, you know? Period, end of story. And if people can't handle that, especially if people try to lie, especially if other people get me to try to lie, won't do it. Won't do it. I will cut ties with somebody if they try to uphold a lie in my presence and try to make me go along with it. Because, and I've got an example of this, I had a friend that was perfectly honest with me the day before, and then tried to turn around and tell me something else a couple of days later down the road. And I'm not going to get into what it was, but suffice it to say, it was a very big lie that didn't just affect that person. And that was the last straw for me. I was like, look, I love you. When you're ready to get your together, I will be here for you, but I cannot be here with you upholding this lie that I know is a lie because you told me the truth for days. Sorry. So that's another example of a bigger boundary I have that I will not budge on. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that comes to mind. I don't find myself often in positions where I have to worry about people respecting my boundaries because I make sure to surround myself with people who do respect my boundaries. You know, that's the way it is now. So it's kind of hard to come up with situations. You know, I have to think back. Another example of someone lying. I had someone who was using me for money back when I was ballin' there for a little while. And the person was starting to lie to me about why they needed money. And, oh, this is another part of it too. I had very specifically told them how to solve the solution. And that was kind of how I figured out that it was a lie. Because they kept making excuses for why they didn't use the solution I had given them. So it had become apparent that they were lying to me. And I don't mess with liars. I just don't do it. So that's another boundary. I do not have people in my life that try to make me uphold lies, and I do not have people in my life that lie to me. I had just thought of one other for a second, and now I forgot it. Give me a second. Let me see if I can remember what it was. back when I was ballin', giving them advice and then not taking it. I don't remember now. That's okay. I think I've given you guys some good examples. I have a 2-week rule when it comes to dating. I'm not dating anymore. I haven't been for a while, but I have a 2-week rule where I have to, at the very least, know somebody for 2 weeks before I will be physically intimate with them, we'll say. That was one of my old boundaries that I upheld. I mean, I've gone months in relationships as a teenager and an adult without being physically intimate with somebody in a relationship, getting to know each other first before we get into that. So that's an example of a boundary I upheld in the past. Any others that I can think of off the top of my head? No, not really. But now you can kind of see the difference. You know, let's break this down really quickly to finish up. The way I break it down in my course, like I just said, is you want to know what your values are. You want to know what your priorities are, and that will help you figure out what your boundaries need to be if you're confused on what boundaries you should be upholding and which boundaries you don't want to be upholding. So, to give you an example that goes along with some of the examples I just gave you, when it comes to big boundaries, I very much believe in the truth. I very much believe in emotional intimacy and physical intimacy being a spiritual thing. Those are two large values of mine that influence my boundaries. An example of a boundary that I have as a business owner would be that I have my assistant talk to most people who are interacting with me as a professional for the first time, and I will not give out my cell phone number anymore to clients, potential clients, because I have hours of operation. So I have a particular app that I use. If people want to get in contact with me, first of all, you have to be a one-on-one client to get my Voxer direct messaging, even if that's just the once a month on Patreon. You have to be a one-on-one client to be able to even have access to me during my business hours via Voxer direct messaging. And even then, that's not getting my phone number. That is specifically contacting me through Voxer, and I will only talk to them through that means of communication. Because if I was answering messages from people who wanted my time every time they reached out to me, I would be exhausted. That's why people don't get my personal number, because I don't want people to, I can turn my notifications off on Voxer when I'm off business hours. And, I used to have clients that had my personal phone number that I guess still do technically. but they can only contact me in an emergency, and I charge for emergencies. So that's a way in which I uphold my boundaries to make sure that I am taking care of myself first. That's another great example of a boundary that I uphold. It is my responsibility to make sure I am taken care of. That's what this whole boundary thing is about, is taking care of yourself. So realizing, this is probably my biggest boundary of all, which is me first. Period. And if it is not at my expense to do something for somebody else, then I'll do it. But if it is in any way at my expense, then I'm not going to do it. And when I say at my expense, I mean giving up something that I can't afford to give up. Whether that's because I'm tired and I'm low on energy, so I don't have the energy to give away, or giving away something physically like an item, or giving away money. If it is something I cannot afford to give away, that's at my expense. It doesn't happen. That is my number one boundary. Again, I don't think about it often because I don't have people in my life that I have to worry about that with. So it can take me a while to remember, because I've just set my life up in a way that is healthy for me for so long that I don't even have to contemplate my boundaries on a regular basis, because I am around people who know them and respect them. And it's just so innate for me to do the things that are required of me to uphold my boundaries that I don't even have to think that far down the line to ask myself anymore, what is my boundary? Because I just naturally know what to do to make sure that they're upheld at this point, by asking myself questions like, is this at my expense? And I don't even have to do that like actually consciously anymore. I naturally just subconsciously consider it without much thought at all. So, or without, even if it's with thought, it's without enough thought to make it memorable. So, yeah. All right, guys. I think that does it. This is kind of a long video, but here we are. You stuck with me. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet. There are links in the description. We are still doing the fundraiser. That's still going. And there has been a fire lit under my ass to really make sure that we get going. I was letting it sort of take its time. We had to return the rental car the other day. I had to help him return the rental car the other day. So now there's even more of a fire lit under my butt to make this happen. Because he doesn't have a car. I only have a car. So if there are days where we both have to be at work at the same time, who gets the car? So we need to make this happen even faster. So if you haven't heard about my fundraiser yet, go check it out. I will link all that in the description. I will link where you can donate in the description. I will link the videos you can share in the description. And other than that, we are at the end of the month which means we're about to be at the beginning of the month. So if you haven't already signed up for my mailing list, you can sign up for my mailing list. I do one-on-one. We are just at the beginning of this session cycle that's just started, but I still have spots available because I've been so busy working on this fundraiser that if you would like to do one-on-one work with me, if you're ready to grow, expand, and heal, I'm all about that. Hit me up. And if you're not, there's Patreon, where you can get the content that I do that gets even deeper into things like this. So, yeah. All right, guys. May the energy you serve you well. Check out the link in the description. All the links in the description. And subscribe. Subscribe. Because I want to get that custom URL. I want to be youtube.com/balancedblackwood, not youtube.com/randomly generated blah, blah, blah. And YouTube tells me I have to have a certain amount of subscribers to do that. So subscribe. You can turn your notifications off. How many times have you ever heard somebody say that? If you want, do me the favor, subscribe. You can turn the notifications off. If you don't want to hear from me, just subscribe. Help me out. Donate to the fundraiser. I know you will, so thank you in advance. I can't do it without you guys. And I appreciate everyone who's donated. All right, yeah. May the energy you serve you well, and let's keep making our way through.